President Trump has revoked U.S. Secret Service protection for former Vice President Kamala Harris. Vice presidents typically get 6 months of protection when they leave office. President Biden signed an executive order in January extending her protection to 18 months. Well, now her protection will end on Monday, just weeks before she hits the road for a book tour. Meantime, Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook is suing to keep her job on the board after President Trump announced that he was firing her today. There was a hearing on her request for a temporary restraining order to block Trump from doing that as her lawsuit over his actions play out. There was not an immediate ruling. Instead, the judge asked for more written arguments to be submitted by the end of next week. The president and his allies, without an investigation or charges, have accused Cook of mortgage fraud involving properties that she owns.
You had these mortgage receipts very clearly shown to the president, and he has the cause that he needs to fire this individual. He laid it out in the letter that he provided to her and to the public as well. And so we'll continue to fight this battle.
Joining us now to discuss is Erin Carr, Assistant Professor of Law at Seattle University. Erin, thanks for being with us tonight.
Hi, Joyce.
So let's start with the administration's targeting of federal agencies. First, his attempt to fire the Fed Governor Lisa Cook, alleging this mortgage fraud. She's never been charged. Does he have legal grounds to do that?
The answer to that question is presently being litigated, but at the moment, the asserted legal grounds for Ms. Cook's removal appear dubious and possibly pretextual. Certain government officials, such as Ms. Cook, who work for the Federal Reserve and are responsible for managing the nation's monetary policy, can only be removed for cause. For cause is a legal term of art that's open to judicial interpretation, but it's generally been understood as requiring neglect or some type of malfeasance. The for-cause standard is important because it's intended to protect government officials who have important administrative functions that require political neutrality and independence from undue political interference. But at today's hearing, the administration made this argument that federal law provides the president with a significant amount of deference and discretion to determine when that for-cause standard is actually met. What I would add is that the context here for Ms. Cook's firing is relevant to that determination and comes in the midst of an ongoing personal campaign by the president to pressure the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates, and parallel efforts to remove federal officials from other agencies that are also perceived by the administration as being insufficiently loyal. And that could ultimately undermine the administration's assertions here that there is a legitimate good cause to legally justify Ms. Cook's removal from her position.
Yeah, we saw the head of the CDC leaving her office at the request of the White House as well this week. So, as you know, the president is also ordering a handful of agencies terminate bargaining agreements with federal unions, NASA, the National Weather Service, NOAA, and more. Are you seeing a pattern, and what do his actions tell us about what's to come?
There does appear to be a fairly transparent pattern that is emerging with respect to not only the president's actions towards federal agencies, but that also extends to the president's conduct towards the other branches of the federal government, namely Congress and lower federal courts, as well as some state and local governments. Across the board, with respect to nearly every actor in our democratic system that could operate as a counterbalance to this administration, the president is exerting a tremendous amount of control, and in doing so is leveraging the full resources of the federal government to coerce cooperation. And unless the Supreme Court demonstrates a willingness to enforce reasonable constitutional and federal guardrails to constrain the executive branch, the president will likely continue to assert that he possesses these expansive powers and will be further emboldened to test the limits of that power.
You brought up the Supreme Court. As you know, another executive order from the president bans flag burning, something the High Court has ruled twice on, saying that it is protected under the First Amendment right to free expression. So what is this really about in your view? What is going on here?
Yes, you're right to note, Joyce, that this is not a unsettled area of the law. The Supreme Court has adjudicated this issue. It's been resolved for decades at this point. But I think what we are seeing here is that we have a president who's been effectively governing and legislating through executive action, even though that is the role of Congress to enact laws, whereas it's the responsibility of the president to enforce those laws. And many of the president's executive orders, including the order this week criminalizing flag burning, are openly in conflict with settled law surrounding civil rights and constitutional protections. Much like the president has attempted to unilaterally rewrite the Constitution in other areas, such as the 14th Amendment's birthright citizenship guarantees, here too the president is claiming the authority to nullify a key provision of the Constitution, and in this case, it's First Amendment speech protections. I would say that even the most ideologically conservative Supreme Court justices, including Justice Antonin Scalia, have endorsed the position that free expression must extend to unpopular speech, including flag burning, if the First Amendment is to have any meaning at all. And so if the government is ultimately permitted to prohibit disfavored speech and criminalize certain forms of expression, free speech becomes a theoretical concept as opposed to an actual enforceable constitutional right.
Erin Carr, thank you so much. We so appreciate your insight and how you break it down for us to understand what is the law, what is protected under the Constitution, and what is happening in this particular moment.